The courtroom was full, not just with people, but with tension, coiled, buzzing, waiting to snap. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Spectators leaned forward on hard wooden benches. Some came for justice. Others came for the drama. In the dock stood Jonathan. New suit. Old guilt. His hands were folded, his face a careful mask. But masks crack under pressure, and today, the heat was rising. Justice Bamidele Kingsley lifted his glasses. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Does anyone wish to speak before we proceed? A chair scraped across the floor. An 18-year-old girl stood. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the courtroom like a blade. I do. Adana, daughter of the accused. Dressed in a plain blouse and braided hair, eyes steady. Beside her, her mother Sandra sat in a wheelchair, her hands clenched, her back straight, her spirit barely holding. Adana stepped forward. Her hands trembled. Her jaw didn't. She plugged a flash drive into the courtroom monitor. Then she looked at the man she used to call Daddy. This is for Mom, she said. And she pressed play. The screen came alive with a shaky video. A hallway. A shadow. A raised voice. A raised hand. Gasps erupted. Jonathan's face collapsed. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Adana didn't blink. Sandra closed her eyes. The truth had begun to speak. 19 years is a long time to believe in someone. Sandra believed in Jonathan when he had nothing but dreams and debts. Back in their one-room apartment in Oshodi, they'd counted coins together, laughed over a single plate of beans, and prayed in the dark. When his shoes had holes, she called him her king. When her hands bled from scrubbing floors, he kissed them like medals. They had one daughter, Adana, sharp, sweet, and full of questions. Sandra and Adana were more than mother and child. They were a team. They whispered prayers over cooking pots and dreams over laundry water. But dreams bend, and sometimes they break. Jonathan lost his job. Something in him snapped with it. He stared at his tie like it had betrayed him. Sandra picked up the slack. She washed clothes, cleaned houses, sold bread on street corners. When Jonathan got an interview, his first in months, there was no transport money. Sandra didn't hesitate. I'll find it, she said. At dawn, she walked to a construction site and told the foreman, I can carry. Madam, it's heavy, he warned. I can carry, she repeated. And she did, bag after bag of cement, up a shaky wooden plank, her back screaming, her knees threatening collapse. She did it all for 1,000 naira. The fourth bag broke her. She slipped, hit the ground hard. The pain was instant. But she didn't cry. She limped home, gave Jonathan the money. Go, she told him. God is with you. He went. She collapsed. The diagnosis was brutal, spinal cord injury. It is late, the doctor said. She may never walk again. Adana held her mother's hand and cried until her body shook. Sandra whispered through the pain, God sees us. Jonathan returned, kissed his wife's forehead, and promised the world. For 2 days, he meant it. Then came the late nights again. Then no nights at all. Then came Cynthia, perfume like poison, a smile like a razor. Then came the slap. Then the silence. Then came the worst betrayal. Not the violence, not the cheating, but the indifference. You're not in my class, he sneered, adjusting his gold cufflinks. You expect me to introduce a woman in a wheelchair as my wife. He stopped looking at Sandra like a person. She became a weight to him, a stain, something to be removed. And one day he did. He came home with Cynthia on his arm, arrogance in his step, and hatred in his voice. You, he said, grabbing Sandra's wheelchair, are stopping me from living. He threw a brown envelope in her lap. Divorce. Adana's hands shook as she started recording. That was the day everything changed. They were thrown out into the rain. One woman on wheels, one girl with trembling hands. But Grace was watching. Amara, Sandra's oldest friend, opened her door and her arms. You'll stay here, she said. This is not the end. And it wasn't. It was the beginning. Amara called her lawyer. Papers moved. Evidence gathered. And when the court date arrived, Adana walked into the courtroom with one hand on her mother's wheelchair and the other clutching a flash drive. Back in the courtroom, Adana's voice was stronger now. The videos kept playing. Clip after clip. Jonathan dragging Sandra. Insults. Slaps. Tears. Adana stood tall. My mother gave him her youth. Her strength. Her faith. She carried cement, just so he could go to an interview. And when he got the job, he called her a burden. She held up her phone. These recordings. I didn't take them to shame him. I took them because I knew one day the truth would need proof. The judge leaned forward. Jonathan's lawyer objected. My lord, this is character assassination. Adana stared him down. Character doesn't need assassinating. He buried it himself. The judge nodded. Objection overruled. Continue. The final video ended. The room was silent. Sandra's quiet sobs filled the space like a hymn. The judge turned to Jonathan. Do you have anything to say? Jonathan stood slowly. Face red. Voice shaking. She became useless to me, he said. Gasps. Cries. A woman fainted. The judge slammed his gavel. You will remain silent unless spoken to. Then he turned to Sandra. Madam, is there anything you wish to say? Sandra's voice was soft, but it carried. I gave him 19 years. I washed his clothes. I carried his shame. I broke my back for his future. And even in this chair, I stayed loyal. He left. I never did. Adana knelt beside her, crying. Mom, you don't need to explain. I'll speak for you now. The judge looked across the courtroom. I've heard enough. Judgment will be delivered tomorrow at 10 a.m. The gavel came down like thunder, and with it, the beginning of justice. The morning sun rose over Lagos with unusual clarity, casting long golden beams through the gates of the Federal High Court. But inside, tension waited in the shadows. By 9 a.m., the courtroom was full. Again, journalists checked their gear. Women clutched their handbags tighter. Even the air felt cautious, like it didn't want to exhale before the gavel dropped. At the front, Sandra sat in her wheelchair. She wore a simple Ankara gown Amara had ironed the night before. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her face was unreadable, but her daughter knew the look. It was the same one she used to wear when there wasn't enough soup to go round, and she gave Adana the biggest piece of meat anyway. Beside her, Adana held her hand, pale but unshaken. Don't be afraid, Mom, she whispered. Today, truth speaks. Sandra gave a weak smile. I only pray the judge has ears for it. The doors opened. Guards entered first, then Jonathan. His suit was the same, but now it hung on him like guilt. Wrinkled. Tired. He scanned the room and caught Sandra's eyes. She looked away. Adana did not. Behind him slinked Cynthia, dressed in black, sunglasses over shame. She didn't look left or right. Her days of pointing fingers were done. All rise, the bailiff called out. Justice Bamidele entered, robe flowing, gaze sharp. He sat. The courtroom followed. This court delivers judgment today, he said, his voice like a warning shot. We have reviewed the evidence. Videos, hospital reports, witnesses, and silence. Your silence, Mr. Jonathan, when your voice should have defended your home. The courtroom held its breath. But before I pronounce sentence, I will allow final words. He turned to Sandra. Madam. She lifted her head slowly. Her voice was soft, but steady. I do not want revenge. I want peace. I want to live without fear. I want my daughter to grow up knowing that truth matters. That love does not mean pain. That women are not furniture to be used and forgotten. The judge nodded. And you, sir? He turned to Jonathan. The man who once raised his hand now raised his voice, but barely. My lord, I made mistakes. I was under pressure. A man has needs. Enough, the judge snapped. A man has responsibilities. You had a woman who lifted cement to build your future, and you repaid her with bruises. He turned. Miss Adana, you stood here with courage. Do you wish to say a final word? Adana stood slowly. I never wanted to speak against my father, but I could not watch my mother suffer in silence. She gave everything, and he repaid her with pain. If the court does not protect women like my mother, then who will? Silence followed, the kind that carries weight. Then the gavel rose. This court finds Mr. Jonathan guilty on all counts: domestic violence, emotional abuse, abandonment. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison without the option of fine. Gasps. Murmurs. Cynthia let out a choked sob. Jonathan's knees buckled. The guards grabbed him before he fell. No, please, he shouted. She was my wife. I was angry. I didn't mean. The gavel banged again. Take him away. As the guards dragged him out, he turned. Sandra, forgive me. Adana, I'm still your father. But Adana turned her back, and Sandra closed her eyes. The room buzzed. Reporters rushed out. Justice had spoken, but victories like this don't come without scars. That evening, Amara's small sitting room became a celebration. Plates of jollof rice and fried meat covered the table. Neighbors hugged Sandra. "You're a lioness," one woman said. "God fought for you," said another. But Sandra sat quietly, watching the laughter around her like it belonged to someone else. "Yes, justice came," she whispered. "But the father of my child is in prison. My heart is heavy." Adana knelt beside her. "Mom, you didn't put him there. He put himself there. You gave him love. He gave you pain. Let his punishment stay on him." Sandra nodded, slowly. "You're the reason I still breathe." Weeks passed. The court case faded from the headlines, but the echoes remained. Adana and Sandra learned to stretch every naira. Amara helped. Neighbors pitched in. But hardship is stubborn. It doesn't leave just because you're brave. Still, there were moments of light. One morning, a letter came. An NGO had followed the case. They were offering Adana a full scholarship, books, tuition, uniform, for the rest of her secondary education, and even beyond. She dropped the letter and wept. "Mom," she whispered, "our story is changing." Sandra pulled her close. God never abandons his own. Adana blossomed at school. Her notebooks filled with code, her mind filled with possibilities. "Mom," she said one day, "we learned JavaScript today. I think I can build an app. Maybe one day, I'll build something that helps women walk again." Sandra smiled. "My daughter, your dreams are already healing me." But not everyone celebrated. Some neighbors whispered. She disgraced her father in court. Sandra heard. But she didn't reply, because silence had almost killed her once. She wouldn't let it finish the job. In prison, Jonathan faded. The man who once strutted through life now sat on a cold bed, staring at nothing. Cynthia vanished. His friends forgot his name. All he had were memories and regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dark. "I'm sorry." But the walls did not answer. One Saturday, Sandra and Adana were invited to a women's seminar. The NGO wanted Sandra to speak. She hesitated. "Why me?" Adana took her hand. "Because someone needs to hear your voice." The hall was packed. Women from all walks of life. Eyes that had seen things they never dared speak of. Sandra wheeled onto the stage. Adjusted the mic. "I was a wife who gave everything. And the man I loved broke me. But I survived. My daughter became my voice. And because of her, justice came." The crowd wept. Applauded. A woman shouted, "You are not broken. You are our hero." Sandra cried. But this time, the tears cleansed instead of crushed. Adana ran up, hugged her. Flashbulbs popped. The moment went viral. Headlines: "Wheelchair Mother Becomes Voice for the Voiceless." More invitations came. Churches, schools, even small stipends. Sandra wasn't just surviving now. She was becoming a symbol. But the past has long arms. One evening, a letter arrived. From Jonathan. "Sandra," it read, "they say you are strong now. That our daughter shines. I cannot sleep. I see your face. I regret everything. Please forgive me. Even if you never take me back, please forgive me, so I can die in peace." Sandra handed the letter to Adana. "Mom, what will you do?" Sandra stared into space, then sighed. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. He may have it, but he no longer has a place in my life." They burned the letter together, watched it curl into ash. And with it, another chain broke. The years didn't pass, they unfolded. With every exam, every new line of code, Adana climbed. The girl who once pushed her mother's wheelchair across courtrooms now walked into computer labs with confidence. Her uniform was the same, but her future no longer was. Then came the second letter. From the same NGO. "Congratulations. You've been selected for a full international scholarship to study software engineering abroad." The living room went silent. Then Sandra screamed. Adana stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hand. "Me?" she whispered. "They want me." Sandra pulled her close. "You? Of course you." Then they both wept, because this wasn't just a scholarship. It was proof. Proof that pain could bloom into purpose. The farewell ceremony was held in the school assembly hall. The stage was decorated with bold banners: courage, resilience, change. Teachers, journalists, and students packed the room. Sandra sat in the front row, radiant in a gold-patterned gown. Amara beside her, dabbing her eyes before the first word was spoken. Then Adana walked onto the stage. She wore her uniform like armor. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on her mother. She took a breath. Then she spoke. "My name is Adana. You may know me as a student. But I am also the daughter of a woman who lost her legs so her husband could stand. Silence. My mother gave everything. He gave her betrayal. I watched her suffer, and I chose to speak. She paused. Her voice did not break. Justice isn't revenge. It's light in a dark room. And if my voice could bring that light for one woman, then all our pain was worth it. The hall rose to its feet. People clapped, cried. The principal wiped his glasses. Sandra sat frozen in awe. Then someone stepped into the room. A man in prison uniform, flanked by guards. Jonathan. Permission had been granted. One last glimpse, under supervision. He looked older, smaller. He watched Adana like someone watching a train he once built, now speeding away without him. When the program ended, the guards allowed him a moment. He walked slowly to Sandra's chair, chains at his ankles. His voice cracked. Sandra, Adana, I came to say sorry. I don't deserve anything, I know. But I couldn't die without saying it. Sandra looked at him. Her face was unreadable. We don't need your words, she said softly. We healed when we let go. The guards took him away. This time, no one cried. Weeks later, Adana left for the airport. She held her mother for a long time before boarding. Mom, I'll call every day, and one day, I'll bring you with me. Sandra smiled through her tears. Walk boldly. You are the daughter of a survivor. Then Adana disappeared through the gate, and the journey began. Abroad, Adana flourished. Her professors called her brilliant. Her classmates called her unstoppable. She graduated top of her class, published papers in international journals, and turned down multiple job offers because her heart was still back home, in a small room once filled with pain. Back in Nigeria, Sandra spoke at churches and campuses. Her voice, once trembling, now filled auditoriums. Amara stayed beside her, managing calendars and cooking stews. Their home wasn't big, but it pulsed with peace. Then one day, another letter arrived. Mom, Adana wrote, I've been offered a job at a global tech firm, but I won't stay. I want to come home. I want to build something. A foundation. In your name. The Sandra Foundation. Sandra read the letter again and again. Then she pressed it to her chest. Lord, she whispered, you turned ashes into pillars. Months later, Murtala Muhammad International Airport buzzed with flashbulbs. Banners waved. Welcome home, Adana. Sandra waited at the front, her wheelchair decorated with flowers. Then the sliding doors opened, and Adana appeared. Grown, confident, glowing. She dropped her bags and ran to her mother. Mom, I'm home. Sandra held her tightly. And this time, we're building a future no one can break. The Sandra Foundation opened its doors 6 months later. A gleaming building in Lagos, filled with color, computers, and compassion. Inside were classrooms for girls, therapy rooms for women, and signs that read, Your story is not over. At the launch, Adana stood beside her mother on the podium. This foundation is not just about my mother, she said. It's about every woman who thought her voice didn't matter. It's proof that survivors can build legacies. The crowd cheered. Sandra wept. But this time, not from sorrow. From glory. The gift wasn't a ring, a car, or even a title. It was land. Quiet land in Ape, Lagos. A plot barely known to anyone but Adana and the bank officer who watched her sign the final document with trembling hands. She built the house in silence. One transfer at a time. One email to the architect. One sleepless night. And when the paint dried, when the roof no longer echoed with scaffolding, she brought Sandra there without explanation. Mom, she said, helping her out of the car. Sandra looked around. White walls, trimmed with gold. Roses lining the path. A small, simple gate. There was a ribbon on it. Whose house is this? She asked. Adana smiled. Yours. Sandra blinked, confused. I built it. With my scholarship money. My work abroad. Every blessing I've ever received has your fingerprints on it. Now it's your turn to rest somewhere that belongs to you. Sandra's legs buckled. Adana rushed to steady her, but she sank slowly to her knees on the tiled porch. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, she had something no one could take from her. Not a gift from a husband. Not a borrowed room in a cousin's house. Not a church's spare flat. A home, built with love, not pity. The neighbors soon came, clapping, dancing, cheering. Amara cried the loudest. This child, she kept saying, this child has rebuilt what life tried to break. Inside, The house smelled of lavender and fresh paint. A wooden plaque hung near the front door. This house stands because a woman once refused to fall. That night, Sandra sat in her own living room, sipping tea from a cup she hadn't borrowed. She ran her fingers across the table. It wasn't new, but it was hers. And in the silence, she whispered, "Thank you, God, for restoring me in ways I never imagined." But restoration isn't always simple. One Tuesday afternoon, Adana sat with an envelope in her hands. Her brow furrowed. "It's from the courts," she said finally. Sandra looked up. "Jonathan is being considered for early release. Good behavior." Sandra said nothing. "He's asked to see you." Still silence. Then Sandra placed her tea gently on the table. "Why now?" Adana shrugged. 9 years is a long time. Maybe prison humbled him. Maybe regret finally caught up. Sandra leaned back. Regret is not repentance. But she looked out the window. Her garden bloomed there. Roses she'd planted with trembling fingers. Every thorn, every bud, earned. Maybe it's time to forgive. Not for him, for me, for us. Adana reached for her hand. "You sure?" Sandra nodded. Forgiveness is freedom. But it's not a welcome mat. When Jonathan came to the house weeks later, the air felt heavier. He wore a plain shirt. Carried nothing. Not even pride. He stood at the gate, not daring to press the bell. Adana opened it. Behind her, Sandra waited on the veranda. Jonathan's eyes were sunken. His once coiffed hair now grayed, his shoulders smaller. He looked not like a villain, but like a man haunted by the memory of who he used to be. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you for releasing me, for not holding me prisoner in your heart, even when the law did." Sandra looked at him, unreadable. "You were a chapter," she said. But the book kept going. Jonathan swallowed hard. "I know, and I'll go. I needed to see her again, even from a distance." Adana stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You've seen her. You've spoken. Now go rebuild your life. Somewhere else." Jonathan bowed his head. "I don't expect forgiveness to undo what I did, but I'll carry it. Every day." He turned and walked away, smaller still. Adana watched him disappear down the road, then turned back to her mother. Sandra exhaled, like a lung finally full after years underwater. "That was closure," she said. Life didn't pause for grief. Adana's career rose like sunrise. She joined a tech firm with global reach, balancing development work with humanitarian projects. Her name began to appear in lists: Forbes 30 Under 30, Tech Women of Africa, and The Guardian's 50 Future Shapers. But it wasn't just the accolades. It was Johnson, a quiet architect with wide eyes and an even wider heart. They met at a seminar on social housing. She was speaking. He was sketching. Afterward, he handed her a drawing of a women's shelter, scribbled on a napkin. "I'd like to build places that protect people like your mom," he said. That was the beginning. They talked, then walked, then laughed. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow-growing tree, rooted in mutual pain, watered with patience. When he knelt, it wasn't in grandeur. It was in gratitude. "Adana," he said, "will you let me walk beside you through every chapter?" "Yes," she whispered, "even the ones with scars." The wedding brought Lagos to a standstill. Guests flew in. Journalists lined the church walls. But no one looked more radiant than Sandra. She entered on her own 2 feet. The same woman once told she'd never walk again now walked beside her daughter, holding her hand down the aisle. The crowd gasped, then stood, then clapped. Jonathan came too, quietly, allowed under the watch of 2 court escorts. He sat in the last row, wiping his face with trembling fingers as he watched the 2 women he'd once crushed now rise like queens. When Adana and Johnson exchanged vows, Sandra closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, I am full." A year later, a new voice joined the story. A baby. Adana gave birth to a daughter with wide eyes and restless hands. Sandra held her close, rocking gently. "What's her name?" she asked. Adana smiled. "Sandra." The older woman blinked, then sobbed. "You've given me life," she said, again. Even Jonathan was allowed to visit. He stood at the threshold of the nursery, hands trembling. "She's beautiful," he said. Adana turned to him, not smiling, but not bitter. "She carries your blood," she said, "but she will never carry your mistakes." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Thank you for letting me see her." "You saw her," Adana replied. "That's enough." That evening, Sandra whispered to her granddaughter, "Little one, your name carries fire and strength, just like your mother, and just like me." Outside, the stars blinked over Lagos. And for the first time, every room in the house held joy. Not borrowed, but built. Built from pain. Built from courage. Built from love. Years drifted on soft wings. They did not heal everything, but they taught patience. They did not erase scars, but they made them part of the map one walked on. So the journey itself became worthy of walking. The next generation. From the moment little Sandra first opened her eyes, the house brimmed with new promise. She toddled through halls painted with strength, for the walls had seen storms and survived. Adana watched her daughter explore every corner, touching the photos on the wall, the plaques bearing mothers' names, the microphones inherited from courtroom speeches. One afternoon, Sandra handed the baby to Adana, then slowly rose and walked to the window. "She looks like you," she whispered. Adana hugged her daughter, pressing her cheek to the baby's soft curls. "She's hope," she said. As she grew, Sandra Jr. asked questions. "Mommy, why does your leg hurt?" And Grandma, "Did you know Daddy before he went away?" The house taught them both honesty. There were answers, carefully given, truths softened by love. They told her of pain, betrayal, resurrection, but always of dignity, always of faith. They told her that sometimes we forgive, not because the offender deserves it, but because we deserve to breathe without bitterness. 2. The foundation in bloom. The Sandra Foundation, born of a courtroom, birthed in pain, leveled in conviction, became more than a name. It became a movement. Girls from poor neighborhoods came in droves. They came to learn coding, public speaking, trauma counseling, legal literacy, solar engineering, health awareness. They came to hear Sandra's voice, not pleading, not accusing, but steady. One of the flagship programs was Steps to Stand, a rehabilitation and empowerment initiative for women with spinal injuries. Thanks to funds from Adana's tech partnerships and foreign donors, they built small therapy centers in Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano. Women who once believed their wheelchairs were forever found hope in physiotherapy halls, strength in shared stories, skills in vocational training. Each year, the foundation held a Phoenix Gala, not to celebrate wealth, but to honor women who survived. The red carpet was always modest, the speeches always authentic. Sandra rarely spoke the longest, but when she did, she spoke of scars and promises. "They told me I would never walk again. They told me to be silent. But I learned that a woman turns silence into song, and a song can ignite change." These events captured headlines, drew NGOs, and stirred policy debates. The foundation's name became a rallying cry. The story of Sandra in her wheelchair, defended by a daughter with a flash drive, was taught in universities. 3. Return of the Father. Jonathan served his sentence in full, with the early release, but also with time earned for good conduct and rehabilitation. The walls had aged him. He walked out of prison a man hollowed and humbler. He tried to reach them, at first through letters, then through an emissary, but he received no reply. One dawn, a messenger arrived at the gate of their house. A request, "May I see them?" to apologize in person, if only for a moment. Adana consulted with Sandra. Sandra lay awake that night, remembering her falls, her tears. The man who once walked beside her now stood behind bars. She prayed. "Very well," she said, "but on my terms." And so, they allowed the meeting in the small courtyard of the house he helped build. It was midday. The sun bore witness. Jonathan came in quietly, head bowed. He carried no flowers, no speeches. He only carried the weight of his past. Sandra sat, steady. Adana stood beside her daughter, who watched from the doorway. He stood before Sandra. "Forgive me," he said. He faltered. He swallowed. "I destroyed you. I failed you. I hurt you, and I betrayed every promise I made. I do not expect you to welcome me back, but I came to say I am sorry, with no excuse." Sandra looked at him. Her eyes were soft, but not weak. They had seen darkness and found light again. "I forgive you," she said. The words were not triumph. They were choices. But that forgiveness isn't a bridge back to the past. It is a door forward to peace. You must walk away now and never come back as father or husband. You may walk on your own return path, but our path is closed to you. He nodded, tears glinting. He rose, bowed, and left, never to knock again. Inside, relatives and friends heard his departure, and some cursed, some wept. But Sandra, softly, whispered a prayer. Every wound that heals serve others who bleed. 4. The home is a beacon. The bungalow in Ape became more than a house. It was a university of dreams. Adana remodeled a wing into a legacy room, walls lined with photos of the court, the home, the foundation's journey. The little girl who played in its halls learned early that the house was not about bricks. It was about survival, witness, and inheritance. Every guest, visiting dignitaries, journalists, scholarship winners, sat in that room, and Sandra always gave the same welcome. You are safe here. You are known. You are honored. The garden bloomed. Roses, white lilies, bougainvillea. Sandra walked through paths she once thought she'd never tread again. She planted saplings. She nurtured birds. She watched the sun through her window and remembered she was alive. One afternoon, she met a therapist from Steps to Stand who had just helped a woman first stand after years of paralysis. That woman held the news, trembling, in her palms. Sandra wept with her. That, more than any court verdict, was the crown she wanted. The child who carries the light. Sandra Jr. watched all this. She watched not as a passive heir, but as a rising steward. She learned coding beside her mother and aunt. She delivered speeches at teen empowerment camps. She asked questions in foundation board meetings. She watched the film footage, the courtroom, the gavel, her mother's shaking hands. She would sometimes ask, "Will I be brave like her?" Her mother would smile and say, "You don't need to be brave. You just need to be honest. The rest grows." One day, when Sandra Jr. turned 18, she was invited to speak at the Phoenix Gala. The hall held its breath as she walked to the podium, her small frame carrying the heritage of 2 generations. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice steady though young, "I stand not on the shoulders of giants, but because my mother and grandmother built their bricks in places no one could see. I know pain. I know weakness. I know brokenness. But I also know healing, witness, and the power that blooms when truth is not buried." By the end of her speech, the crowd was on its feet. Tears, applause, hope. That night, Adana hugged her. Sandra wept, but quietly, softly. "You have your own story now," she whispered. "Not mine." 6. The full circle. Years passed. The house in Ape saw birthdays, funerals, graduations. It saw laughter echo in its halls, stories whispered at night, guests walking through its doors to ask for help. Adana's career rose further. She became CEO of a tech startup that developed healthcare apps, some tailored for women recovering from trauma, others to monitor spinal injury recovery remotely. Her company's first success was an app that sent physiotherapy reminders, motivational messages, and daily check-ins to hundreds of women across Nigeria. It was named Stand With Me. The foundation's reach grew. Partnerships with universities abroad, legislative reforms in Nigeria around domestic violence, shelters in multiple states. The name Sandra became synonymous with transformation. One national award ceremony presented them with a Lifetime Achievement Award. The host read, "For the courage to break silence, the grace to forgive, and the strength to rebuild lives, we honor Sandra and Adana Williams." They stood, Sandra in a modest gown, walking with confidence, and Adana by her side, strong as ever. When the applause faded, Sandra's voice cracked. "I never dreamed we'd reach this place. But every tear, every bruise, every loss led me here. And to you, my daughter, thank you for turning pain into purpose." Epilogue, whispers in the future. One evening, many years later, Sandra sat on her veranda, watching the sunset bathe the home in gold. Adana sat beside her, Sandra Jr. already asleep in her room. Johnson had stepped out for errands. The home's quiet was not emptiness, it was peace. Sandra whispered into the dusk, "The universe is stranger and kinder than fear says it is. Maybe pain is not just suffering, maybe it's a forge." Adana squeezed her mother's hand. "You forged us," she said. Beyond the fence, lights flickered in the city. Lagos, loud and alive. But inside these walls, a legacy breathed. A legacy of truth. A legacy of courage. A legacy of women who refused to stay silent, who reclaimed rooms once stolen, who forgave not to forget, but to free. And the name Sandra did not just stand for a woman who fell. It stood for every woman who rose.